Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation, which is IEPs and auxiliary aids. It is just now 10 o'clock, and I see we have quite a few participants already on. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So just so everyone knows, this is part one of a 6-part OVR webinar series. Like I said, today is going to focus on IEPs and auxiliary aids. The remainder of the webinar series is going to focus on our 5 required pre-employment transition services. My name is Caitlin Salvati. I am the Eastern Region Transition Specialist with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. I did want to start out by saying I know we have a diverse audience with us today. I wanted to remind everyone that the information contained in the presentation is going to be mainly directed to OVR staff. We hope it's beneficial to numerous people, but as I am talking, please be aware that I am talking as if just talking to OVR staff, so I hope I don't confuse you. I did want to let you know that the handouts and a recording of this webinar, after it's concluded, can be found on the Patent website. I believe Hillary Mangus is going to share the link so everyone will be able to access it. And also, as you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to share them in the question and answer box, the Q&A box that you should see on your screen. If you share them there, we will be able to capture them. So if we aren't able to answer all the questions today, we'll still be able to retain a record of all the questions that come in, and we can continue to answer them and email out those answers to everyone. If you type in just the chat box, we won't be able to retain a record. So please use the Q&A box for any questions. So I hope that I covered everything, and I am going to get started with today's presentation.
Caitlin, can we give a minute to make sure that the captioning is up and running? It seems like
Sure.
It might not be working yet.
Oh, yep, sure. Sorry. I could switch back to the first slide.
Okay, it looks like we're all good now. Thanks.
Sure. Did you want me to repeat anything to start, or are we good to continue?
I think with the links and the handouts, we should be good to go.
Okay, thanks, Hillary. All right, so hopefully after today's presentation, you will be able to explain OVR's role at an IEP meeting, list the best practices to follow at an IEP meeting, explain when to use PETS funds for auxiliary aids, access the PA lending library, and learn all the new service codes that we have for our auxiliary aids. So we are going to start with IEP meetings. I apologize, I used the acronym before explaining the whole word, Individualized Education Program Meetings. And we're going to review just best practices and why it's important for OVR staff to attend. So, as OVR staff, why do we have to go to IEP meetings? There are many reasons why OVR can be beneficial at the meeting and aid in the development of an IEP. But first and foremost, is that we are required to attend by law. So starting with the federal law that we all know and love by now, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, requires OVR to set aside at least 15% of its federal funds to provide pre-employment transition services to students with disabilities. Those reserved funds may be used for required, authorized, and coordination activities. And it's when we really look more into the coordination activities, that's where we see attending IEP meetings for students with disabilities when we are invited. We also see IEP meetings mentioned in state law. So when looking at PA's Act 26, we see that the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation should provide information for the development of IEPs for high school students with disabilities, ensuring that job skills training is included in the plans when appropriate. When possible, OVR should attend these meetings in person or by alternative means, such as a video conference or a conference call. And again, we see when invited by local education agencies. So that's really a key piece, is that OVR first has to be invited to the IEP meeting in order for us to attend. So we also see that Act 26 directs OVR to publish a quarterly report on our website. Within this report, we have to include the number of individualized education meetings attended by OVR staff and the number of individual education plans that include new or significantly modified goals and specific steps towards the attainment of competitive integrated employment. All right, so now that we know why we are attending IEP meetings, let's talk about the importance of these meetings. So the purpose of an IEP is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services that are designed to meet that student's unique needs and to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. We can see how those goals are similar to OVR's goals for our customers. So we're kind of all working towards the same goal for a student. I did also want to highlight that services that OVR is providing should not be included on the IEP. If for some reason that service does not occur within the school year, then the school will be held responsible to provide those services. So I did just want to highlight that piece. For children of transition age, and in Pennsylvania that is 14, the IEP must include post-secondary goals that are related to training, education, employment, and when appropriate, independent living skills, and the transition services that are needed to assist the child in reaching those goals. As a vocational rehabilitation counselor or an early reach coordinator, you have valuable perspectives and insights to offer when discussing transition topics during IEP meetings. For example, when we're discussing these transition goals, OVR can provide input on what accommodations may be accepted at a workplace or post-secondary education institution to help prepare that student for that transition. As students near graduation, we can encourage only using the accommodations that are going to be available to them outside the school environment. Again, to help better prepare students for this transition, whether it is post-secondary education or employment. All right, so how do we document an IEP meeting? We have two different ways that we can do this, and it's really based upon who the student is. So if they are a potentially eligible student, they don't yet have an open case with OVR, then we're going to need to get a student release form, and we're going to need to complete the PETS roster. Both of those documents are then used to put information into CWDS to show that you are at an IEP meeting for a potentially eligible student. When we're talking about release forms, best practice is to obtain our PETS release form, the OVR 244. If we cannot get that form signed for whatever reason, then we can use a school release form in order to record that IEP meeting. As long as the school release form states that they have permission to share that student's information with OVR, and it includes those 9 data points that we need. However, just a little, if we do use the school's resource or release form, Before a student can then participate in a required PETS, we are going to need to get our release form signed, that 244 form signed. So that's just when we're dealing with potentially eligible students. Now, when we're looking at students that have an open case, it's a little bit simpler. We're just going to go into CWDS under their case file and create a case progress note. We just want to make sure that when we're selecting the note type, we're selecting PETS student services, and then we're checking off that it's a student IEP meeting. As I just mentioned earlier, we are mandated by law to attend IEP meetings, and we are publishing that Act 26 report that shows that we are attending IEP meetings. So it's important that we are accurately documenting in CWDS to show the work that you are doing. I did also include at the bottom of this PowerPoint a link to our T Drive that will take you to a previous training on how to complete the roster, the 243 form, and how to document in CWDS if you want a little bit more information to follow up with this slide. So, and lastly for IEPs, I just wanted to end with some best practices for our OVR staff. First is to talk to schools about the time frame for inviting you to an IEP meeting. I know that we tend to schedule a full school year out in advance, so it can be really hard if we're being notified last second of IEP meetings to try and fit that into our schedule. So talk to your schools about how much time you need, what days maybe work better for you than others. If possible, see if you can schedule IEP days at the school where you're just there for the full day and you're attending IEP meetings one after the other. I did also include a link in the PowerPoint to the Cyber Charter IEP invite process document, since that is a little different when talking about being invited to a Cyber Charter IEP and how we attend that versus our brick and mortar schools. If possible, get releases ahead of time for potentially eligible students. That way we already know we have the information we need in order to enter them into CWDS and document that we were at that IEP meeting. Create packets of OVR information to bring to meetings. That way you don't have to, when you're going to a meeting, you already know what you need to grab. You don't have to think about it ahead of time. Or this information can be shared if you cannot attend. At the meeting, provide information to the student and family about pre-employment transition services and vocational rehabilitation services and what the difference between the two are. You can discuss OVR's eligibility requirements and explain how we are an eligibility program and not an entitlement program. And when appropriate, you can direct students to complete the pre-application and show them how to refer themselves to OVR. So in addition to these best practices, there is also some more information on the T Drive under the Early Reach folder that Sarah Vogel has pulled together. So feel free to check that out as well in order to supplement this. She has gone through and gotten a lot of great information. So that wraps up our IEPs. We're now going to move into PETS funding for auxiliary aids. We're going to review when to use PETS funds to purchase auxiliary aids for students, as well as the new service codes that we have. So to start, I'm actually going to define the difference between auxiliary aid and assistive technology. If you were like me at the start of this presentation, you might not have known there was a difference between the two, but there is, and I'm going to explain that here. So when we're talking about auxiliary aids, they are going to be defined as services or devices that enable a person with impaired sensory, manual, or speaking skills to have an equal opportunity to participate in and enjoy the benefits of a program or activity conducted by the agency. However, when we're talking about assistive technology, it's going to be a device, software, or equipment that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of of an individual with a disability. This may not seem very different based on these definitions, but basically when we're talking about auxiliary aids, we're talking about a general service to ensure access. And so this could be an ASL interpreter. This is not really a device or anything specific to a person. It's just allowing somebody that uses ASL to be able to participate in that activity. Whereas assistive technology is very specific to an individual, and that would be a hearing aid. So again, that person now has access to that activity, but it's very specific to them and most likely is a device that can only be used by that person. So again, when we're talking about auxiliary aids, we're talking about general services, not specific to a person, and that can most likely be used by multiple people. And again, assistive technology is going to be very specific to a person. So I hope that that is a clear definition and kind of explains the difference between the two. And again, we're going to start with what the federal law is directing us to do for these students and how we can use our PETS funds. So looking at WIOA, if a student with a disability requires an auxiliary aid to access or participate in any of the pre-employment transition services, that's when we can use PETS funds to pay for such costs. However, should a student need more individualized services, and then here is where we see assistive technology, then that student would need to apply and be determined eligible for vocational rehabilitation services. So we're seeing within WIOA the distinction between auxiliary aids and assistive technology. One we can use PETS funds for, the other one the student would need to open a case for. So when can we use PETS funds? We can use PETS funds to purchase auxiliary aids for a student when that student is participating in any of the 5 required pre-employment transition services. We cannot use PETS funds for assessments to determine appropriate accommodations for customers and training on how to use these accommodations. And we cannot use PETS funds to modify a student's personal equipment or device. Those last 2 bullet points is where we cross the line into assistive technology, individual to the customer or to the student. So we cannot use PETS funds for that. All right, on the next 2 slides, I do have examples of auxiliary aids. This first slide contains auxiliary aids for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. I apologize, there is a lot on that screen and I know the font is a little small, so if you need to pull it up on your own computer or laptop later to be able to see it more clearly, please do so. But these auxiliary aids you're going to see listed on the screen, they include qualified interpreters, note takers, written materials, assistive listening devices, closed caption decoders. I'm not going to read through all of them because there is a lot on here. But again, you're going to see that everything listed here is pretty general and can most likely be used by multiple people. It's not specific to a person. We're going to see the same thing on this next slide, which is auxiliary aids for students who are blind or visually impaired or deaf-blind students. On here we can see, again, qualified readers, audio recordings, braille materials, magnification software, large print materials. Again, all of these can most likely be used by more than one person. And so if we have several students within a setting who are blind or visually impaired, they can most likely share this information in order to be able to access a service or the material. The last slide is examples of what is not an auxiliary aid. And this is going to include a personal device, a computer, a laptop, a tablet, a prescribed device, eyeglasses, hearing aids, a wheelchair, readers for personal use or study, attendant care, or home and vehicle modifications. Again, you can see how these are much more specific to an individual. We're now crossing that line into assistive technology. All right, so for our OVR staff, if we have a potentially eligible student who needs an auxiliary aid to participate in a pre-employment transition service, how are we going to go about that? How would we purchase that auxiliary aid for the student? So the first step that we're asking you to take is seeing if the student can seek comparable benefits from the school district. Is the school already providing something, or do they have access to an auxiliary aid that would allow the student to participate in that pre-employment transition service? If the school district is unable to provide that necessary auxiliary aid, then the student and the OVR counselor can consult the lending library. On the next slide, I have a whole bunch of information on the lending library and how to access that. If for some reason, if the device that we need is not available at the lending library, or if they cannot get it out to your area for some reason and no other options are available, then we can look to have that student apply for OVR services. They don't have to go through the process of being found eligible. They just have to be in applicant status, so that auxiliary aids can be purchased using PETS funds. So those are the 3 steps that we're asking you to go through in order to obtain an auxiliary aid for a student. Again, only when they are participating in a pre-employment transition service. So here's a little bit more information now on the lending library. Pennsylvania's Assistive Technology Lending Library provides the opportunity for Pennsylvanians to borrow and assess devices prior to purchase. So the lending library used to be located on PIAT's website. It has now moved to Tech Owl, and that is a live link there. So if you click on the word Tech Owl, it will take you to their website. If you have any difficulties accessing the website or have any questions about it, there is also an email address listed here below that you can email. It's iod@temple.edu. Just so you know, when you do hop on that website, before you can borrow from the lending library, you will have to get a library card number. You just basically have to sign up on their website, and then that library card will allow you to reserve devices. Also, if for some reason, again, Tech Owl is not working for you or does not have the device that you need, you can also search for regional lending libraries in your area. So your local intermediate unit or your county might have a lending library you can access simply by Googling your area and sticking on AT Lending Library. I know that it may be confusing that assistive technology is mentioned here within the names, and I specifically said that we can only use PETS funds for auxiliary aids. So while WIOA and OVR have defined the difference between auxiliary aids and assistive technology, I do not have any control over the naming of Pennsylvania's lending library. So they do use assistive technology here. So I hope that did not create any confusion, since I am talking about obtaining an auxiliary aid for our students. All right, and in an effort to ensure that we are using PETS funds correctly, all previous service codes that we had for auxiliary aids and assistive technology are no longer eligible for PETS funds. I did give a couple examples below of what some of those codes are. And what we did was create new service codes that we can use PETS funds for, and I have them listed on the next slide. These codes can be used for both potentially eligible students and our VR customers, and they are to be used to purchase a communication device, software, or equipment that ensures a student has an equal opportunity to participate in a required pre-employment transition service. The only exceptions are going to be the codes that we use for interpreting, because they are vast and typically are linked to a specific provider or have specific costs set up to them. We did not want to mess with those codes. So codes that we have for interpreting, you can still use PETS funds for. So on this slide, you're going to see a table that lists the service name and then the new service code that we have. We have 5 new codes that line up with each of the 5 required pre-employment transition services. So starting at the top, if you needed to purchase an auxiliary aid for a student to participate in a self-advocacy instruction group, then the service code you would use is 507079. The codes are in sequential order. So as you go down and you would need to purchase an auxiliary aid for a workplace readiness training group, that code is 507080. Counseling on post-secondary options is 507081. Job exploration is 507082. And then auxiliary aids for work-based learning experiences is 507083. So again, those are the new codes that are linked to PETS funds. So if you have a student that is participating in a pre-employment transition service, the first thing you need to do is select the correct service, what they're participating in, what that group is, and then you would use the appropriate code in order to purchase an auxiliary aid for that student. All right, so before we move on to questions, I did just want to let you know the dates for the remaining webinar series. I crossed off today's since you are already here. And the next one is to take place Thursday, October 4th, next week, again at 10 a.m., and it's going to focus on self-advocacy. And on the very last slide, I did want to let you know that we have our contact information. Again, I'm Caitlin Salvati, I'm at the top, and we have my email address is listed there, and then I also have the contact information for my counterparts in the 2 other regions, Melissa Wertthrush for the Central Region and Beth Ann Fanning for the Western Region. So I did fly through that material pretty quickly. So I'm actually going to hop up here to the question and answer box. If you have any questions, I hope that you have typed them in here. I'm going to start all the way up here. Did I hear correctly that OVR information is not supposed to be in the IEP? And I am assuming specific names. So yes, I did say that OVR services that we are providing, we do not want to list those on the IEP, just because if for some reason we are not able to provide those services within the school year, especially if it's a referral made to one of our providers to do that service and it's taking a little while to get started, then the school district will be held responsible to provide that service during that school year. So it's really just to protect the school district from having to provide unnecessary services or a service that OVR is going to be providing but just didn't get it done within that time. So I hope that answers your question, Adrian. Joseph, you asked, how does the services relate to people who are deaf and or blind? Hopefully I answered that question as far as if you're talking about auxiliary aids, and being able to access pre-employment transition services, that we are able to still access those auxiliary aids and make sure that all students, no matter their disability, are able to participate in pre-employment transition services. If I didn't answer your question, if you could clarify just a little bit more below, or again, you have my email address and contact information at the end, feel free to just shoot me an email. Jody Barr, you had mentioned that OVR services are an eligibility requirement and not an entitlement program. I believe that's what you are looking for. So that we are an eligibility-based program where you have to be found eligible for OVR services. Again, those are just our vocational rehabilitation services. So we're not an entitlement program. However, when it comes to our pre-employment transition services, those are for all potentially eligible students with disabilities. So those, it's a little different. So I hope I'm not confusing you there. And Joseph, you asked, what about people who use sign language other than ASL? Those who use Spanish Sign Language? We are working with all language interpreters. So I did use ASL, I think, as a specific example, but it would be anything that can, again, allow a student access to a pre-employment transition service. So it could be any language interpreter. All right. Sean, you have asked a question specifically about your son, and including, and I'd like to include transition service planning in his IEP and include OVR. So really your first step is actually going to reach out to the school and let them know that you would like OVR at the IEP meeting. They will most likely give you a form to sign that says that you want OVR at the meeting and it's okay that we are there. And then we do also have our own release form that we can sign. You can either do that ahead of time or we can bring it to the meeting for you to sign there as well. And then as far as there are some specific questions related to your son. So if you would like to shoot me an email and we can kind of see what area you're at and what the next steps are for you. Sorry, I just didn't want to answer all these personal questions on a webinar that's being recorded, but we definitely want to get those answered. So I will hold on to those. And if you want to either share your email information or again, just send me an email directly and I can get back to you. We can list past experiences for documentation purposes on the IEP that OVR has already provided. Oh, most definitely, yes. Anything that's already been provided, any assessments that maybe OVR has done with the student, those can definitely be included in the IEP to show what's already taken place. We just don't want any services that are anticipated to be provided listed on there again. For that reason of we don't want the school to be held responsible if it does not happen within that school year. The OVR can be listed in present levels in the IEP. Hillary, would you be able to clarify this?
Sure. So we're just going to kind of tag on to your previous answer. So things that OVR has already been providing that you have documentation of can be added into the present education levels. In addition, if OVR isn't present at a meeting, but you provide documentation to a parent about services that OVR could provide, you can document that you provided parent with information about how to access OVR. So those are the ways that we encourage schools to put information about OVR in, not in terms of services that are likely or expected to be provided. It's more what has already been provided. It would be what's agreed to in the IEP that goes into the transition grid with OVR going forward.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, Kim, you asked, are we able to purchase auxiliary aids for potentially eligible students receiving group services who have not completed an OVR application? So the only issue is really just our ability to create a purchase order for potentially eligible students for an auxiliary aid. So I believe we're going to have a student at least apply to OVR and be in status O2, applicant status, so that we can create that purchase order. But I will double check and we can get back to you. We actually have our call later today, so I can get back to you on that. Stephanie asked, can providers attend IEP meetings if invited? And will providers be notified on what accommodations a student has? Yes, I have definitely been to IEP meetings where providers are in attendance, especially if they are already providing, doing services with the student. And as far as, again, as long as the parent and possibly student has signed off that it's okay for you to be at the IEP meeting, and then you should also be able to have access to what accommodations the student is receiving. But that's definitely, you can reach out to the specific school, or if it's a student that has an open case, reach out to the OVR counselor to follow up on that and see when the next IEP meeting is. So Ashley, hopefully you said you had the same question as Adrian about including OVR information on the IEP. So hopefully that we have already answered that question. And again, anything that has already occurred can definitely be included. It's just the stuff that is services that are up and coming that we don't want you to be held responsible for until they are already provided. How do I get a copy of today's training? Hillary has shared the link, I believe, already. So hopefully you can access the link to Patton, which will give you access to the PowerPoint, and then will also give you access to the recorded webinar after it's concluded today. And then Adrian asked again, what would you suggest the districts to put in the IEP so that they are in compliance? I always train the teachers to add as much information as they know that is happening between the student and OVR. I don't apologize for the questions. We want to make sure we're being very clear as well. So again, hopefully we have answered that already. That we are including information in the IEP about services that have already occurred, any assessments that have already occurred either by the school, or if done by OVR, we can share that information with you as long as we have a release form signed. So anything that has already happened between OVR and what our current status is with that student can definitely be in the IEP meeting. It's just going to be any services that we want to happen during that year for the student on OVR's end. If they are written in the IEP meeting, and again, for some reason we cannot get around to having those services provided before the end of the school year, that's when the school could be held liable to provide those. So we just want to make sure that's the only instance that's not happening. Wilkes-Barre has a question on the reevaluations. They have an agree, disagree page. Are we supposed to be signing those?
So I can take that one, Caitlin.
Thanks,
this
Hillary.
Is Hillary. Hi, Hillary from Patton. I would just say that an OVR counselor or person attending the meeting is not a member of the evaluation team, and so you are not required to sign the ER or RR page for SLD, specific learning disability determination. Your signatures when you attend a meeting would be on the sign-in sheet of the IEP, just saying that you are physically present, not that you agree or disagree with anything.
Perfect. Thank you, Hillary. Ruth, you asked that, will we as counselors sign up for TechAL and act as a proxy, or should the student sign up themselves? I would definitely recommend that the student or parent sign up, so that way the device is being sent directly to them and being returned to them. They are being responsible for that auxiliary aid. However, we definitely can sign up and act as a proxy if need be. So it could really be either one, but I would definitely encourage for the student to be the first option. Susan, you asked, how do we document IEPs that include that new or significantly modified goals to be recorded for Act 26? I don't actually have a specific answer for you today. I am going to save that question and have Kim Robinson, my supervisor, and Melissa Werthrush work actively on that Act 26 report. So I'm going to ask that of them and get back to you. So good question, Susan. I'll have an answer for you soon. Margie, if we are purchasing an auxiliary aid, does the student keep that device? Or do we need to tag it, and does it belong to the office to use again? At this point, if we are purchasing the auxiliary aid, we are most likely just going to allow the student to then keep that auxiliary aid, hopefully to use in future pre-employment transition services, only because we really don't have a means to have those devices being returned to the office. I'm sure most people don't have the space to keep all those devices. So at this point, we're saying that if we are to the step where we're purchasing that auxiliary aid, then the student can then keep that device. If that changes, I will be letting OVR know. So Linda, you asked a question about a specific communication software and if it was assistive technology or auxiliary support. I am not familiar with that communication software. So again, using the definition of auxiliary aid versus assistive technology, if it's a communication software that can be purchased and be used by multiple students and not just for a specific student, that an individual student would be the only one that has access to that, especially if it's downloaded on a personal laptop or tablet or something like that. So if it's individualized like that, it's going to be probably assistive technology and that we wouldn't be able to use PETS funds for it. If it's something that is general and downloaded on a computer that multiple students would have access to, it would most likely be an auxiliary aid, and that is something we could look into. Any specific questions, you can follow up with your district office or that OVR counselor, or again, reach out directly to me and I can learn a little bit more about that and get back to you. If a student already has an auxiliary aid, like an interpreter during school hours, should the student use that same auxiliary aid during our ERC group services? If your ERC group service is happening during school hours at site on the school, then most likely, yes, that interpreter would be following, the student into, into your group service. But it's probably most likely going to depend on the school and if there are multiple students using that interpreter in a classroom and only one student is being pulled out to attend your group. So I'm not going to be able to answer that one yes or no. Hopefully I answered it a little bit, and then again, feel free to follow up for a more specific situation or example. Can services be eligible to people who have temporary disabilities? Again, that is probably going to depend on the customer. on that specific person, and it's going to depend on what services we're looking to provide. If it's a pre-employment transition service, and that student is in school, and they are classified as a student with a disability at that time, then we are most likely going to be providing pre-employment transition services. When it comes to them opening a case with OVR, we're probably going to have to look a little bit more into that person's disability and condition, and if they are appropriate for OVR services. So, good questions, good specific questions. Are we able to get a certificate for attending this webinar today? If you are an OVR employee and you are attending today's webinar, we are asking that you fill out the roster and the evaluation form in your office so that you can get a certificate for today. So if you just want to reach out to your training coordinator in your office, they should be able to help you get that. Would the IEP include whether the student will be able to do OVR-funded services during the school day and or be transported by the school? Again, if it's a service that you are looking to have occur during that school year that OVR has not already provided, you probably don't want to include it on the IEP.
I will say this, though, Caitlin, in regards to anything that a school puts into an IEP, so whether or not you as OVR provide it, if they are placing it in the IEP, the school district is ultimately responsible for providing it. So if they put something is going to happen and they assume or expect that you're going to be the ones that provide it, that school district or LEA is ultimately responsible for that thing happening. So if they put that a student is going to go to a work-based learning experience and they're going to provide transportation to that experience, the school district would then be responsible if OVR wasn't able to provide it to do that.
Perfect. Thank you, Hillary.
Remember, and I think for anyone who's a school on here, that the things that OVR provides while students are in school are to supplement and not supplant or not replace your obligations under IDEA.
Yes. Awesome. I'm so happy you're here to help with these questions. So Kim, you asked, how are PETS release forms and rosters acquired by the cyber and maybe charter school IEP attendants? We do actually have a whole process set up. Sarah Vogel set up that whole process for our cyber schools. So I did include a link on the PowerPoint on slide 10 to that cyber charter IEP invite process that talks a little bit about how we are being invited to those IEP meetings and the documentation that the cyber schools are sending to us with that invite. So check that out and then let me know if you have any questions. I'm probably going to refer you to Sarah Vogel though, so you might just want to reach out to her. Someone asked if OVR can help get a job or help you get a job, and that is literally our goal. We are an agency that works with individuals with disabilities. I should have explained that at the beginning, and I apologize. I just jump in assuming everybody knows who OVR is, like we have commercials or something. So we are an agency that works with individuals with disabilities that helps them obtain, so find and or keep a job. So I was talking about both our pre-employment transition services today, that are those very general initial services. And then if you want to open a case with us and receive specific vocational rehab services for your goal for employment, then definitely look to us and we will get you started. Would you encourage parents, students, and teachers to include auxiliary aids such as FM systems to be included in their IEPs for any PETS summer youth programming? Hillary, do you want to help out with that one?
I would say that discussion is definitely an IEP team discussion and should be discussed during the IEP. For example, if it's something that that student requires to access instruction, such as an FM system to access the auditory information in a presentation, then the IEP team definitely should be having that conversation about where and how the student may need to access that technology in order to be successful in a type of programming.
Perfect, thank you. I agree. And then the next one is regarding auxiliary aids, purchases and applications. OVR staff just need to ensure that any pre-employment transition service starts before the eligibility determination or placement on the waitlist occurs if the student hasn't received a PETS prior to. Correct. That is correct. So we just need to make sure that a student has already received a pre-employment transition service before being put on the wait list, or that one has at least started. Doesn't have to be completed, but they just have to have started in a pre-employment transition service prior to being placed on the wait list. If you have a student signed up for like a paid work experience and you've put that referral in, but in the meantime, they're placed on the waiting list and nothing has started yet, then that student is going to be stuck there on the waiting list. So we want to make sure that something has already occurred, or that, you know, at least a first meeting has happened with a provider before they're put on that waiting list. So you are correct. So based on WIOA legislation, are the OVR counselors focused on students getting in-demand jobs or just any available positions? When it comes to when we're working individually with a student, and most likely at this point they now have an open case with OVR, and we're talking about their specific job goals, we're going to be looking at lots of factors for that job goal, as far as, is it an in-demand position? Is it something that they are most likely going to be able to be employed in their area? Do they need education in order to obtain that position? Again, is it something that they're going to have to move for? If this is really a job that they want to do, if it's not available in their area, where are they going to have to go in order to obtain that job? So it's going to be focused on you know, that student's employment goal. But we are, you know, hoping to get that student employed then after they graduate high school or after they've completed any post-secondary training. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an in-demand job, but we want to make sure it's a job that's going to be available to them in their area and with the education that they have. So I hope that answers your question. Is any of this information something you need as a supports coordinator? It really was directed to OVR staff. Hopefully it gave you some information that you can use as a supports coordinator, or at least, you know, when you're working together if we have a joint customer. So hopefully you found something useful today. And will central office make the code changes for every provider in CWDS, or is this supposed to be done by the local offices? Rebecca, that is a wonderful question. I will have to follow up, most likely with my supervisor and our central office fiscal assistant to answer that question, and I will get back to you. Thank you for that. All right, I think we've actually gotten through all the questions on the presentation today. We have just 5 minutes left. I don't see any new questions rolling in. There are a couple questions I will be following up on that I didn't get to answer today, I didn't have the answer for today. And again, as anything comes up, please feel free to reach out to me or the other two specialists if you know the region that you're in, and we would be happy to help answer any more questions. If nothing else, we will be back here again next Thursday for self-advocacy.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Thanks, Hillary.